1/3 of population dead in just 4 years. This is the story of the Khmer Rouge. The truths that the world hide from you. Cambodia, a small nation nestled in the heart of Southeast Asia, was once home to one of the most brutal and ideologically extreme regimes the modern world has ever witnessed. The Khmer Rouge, whose name translates to Red Khmers in French, emerged from the dense jungles of Cambodia as a communist revolutionary movement that would go on to reshape the country in the most devastating ways imaginable. To understand how this movement rose to power, one must look back at the turbulent political landscape of Cambodia in the 1950s and 1960s. The movement was led by Saloth Sar, a man who would later become infamous under his revolutionary name, Pol Pot. Born in 1925, Pol Pot studied in France during the late 1940s and early 1950s, where he became deeply influenced by Marxist and Maoist ideologies. He returned to Cambodia with a burning vision of transforming the country into an agrarian utopia, completely stripped of Western influence, capitalism, and what he considered the corrupting forces of modernity. The Khmer Rouge officially formed in 1968 as the armed wing of the Communist Party of Kampuchea. In its early years, it operated primarily as a guerrilla force hiding in the remote jungles and mountains of Cambodia, slowly building its strength and recruiting followers, particularly from among the rural poor who felt marginalized by the urban elite and the existing government. The path that allowed the Khmer Rouge to seize control of Cambodia was paved by a combination of internal political instability and the catastrophic spillover effects of the Vietnam War. In 1970, a United States-backed military coup led by General Lon Nol overthrew the ruling Prince Norodom Sihanouk. This political upheaval created a power vacuum and widespread resentment among the Cambodian population, particularly in rural areas. The United States military, in its efforts to disrupt North Vietnamese supply lines running through Cambodia, launched massive bombing campaigns across the Cambodian countryside. These bombings, which lasted from 1969 to 1973, killed tens of thousands of Cambodian civilians and devastated entire communities. Rather than weakening communist forces, the bombings inadvertently fueled recruitment for the Khmer Rouge, as displaced and grieving villagers turned toward the movement out of anger and desperation. The Lon Nol government, corrupt and increasingly unpopular, struggled to maintain control. Meanwhile, the Khmer Rouge grew stronger, more organized, and more ruthless. By 1975, after 5 years of brutal civil war, the Khmer Rouge marched into the capital city of Phnom Penh on April 17th and took complete control of Cambodia. Crowds initially greeted the soldiers with cautious hope, believing the war was finally over. That hope would be shattered almost immediately. The moment the Khmer Rouge took power, they declared the beginning of Year Zero, a concept that meant erasing all of Cambodia's history and rebuilding society from scratch. Within days of capturing Phnom Penh, the regime forcibly evacuated the entire city, driving millions of urban residents into the countryside at gunpoint. Families were separated, the sick and elderly were left to die on the roads, and anyone who resisted was executed on the spot. The Khmer Rouge renamed the country Democratic Kampuchea, though there was nothing democratic about it. The regime abolished money, private property, religion, and formal education. Temples were converted into prisons or storage facilities. Intellectuals, teachers, doctors, engineers, and anyone wearing glasses, which was seen as a sign of literacy, were targeted for execution. The infamous prison, known as Security Prison 21, or Tuol Sleng, became a center of torture and death where thousands of prisoners were interrogated and killed. The regime organized the population into agricultural communes where people were forced to work grueling hours with little food. Starvation became widespread. The combination of executions, forced labor, disease, and famine resulted in the deaths of an estimated 1.7 to 2.5 million people. representing nearly a quarter of Cambodia's entire population. This period, spanning from 1975 to 1979, stands as one of the most concentrated episodes of mass killing in human history. As the years passed, the Khmer Rouge regime began to consume itself. Pol Pot and the inner circle of leadership, known as Angkar, meaning the organization, became increasingly paranoid about internal enemies and foreign conspiracies. Purges swept through the ranks of the Khmer Rouge itself, with loyal cadres being accused of treason and executed without evidence. Regional commanders were summoned to Phnom Penh and never returned. The eastern zones of Cambodia, which bordered Vietnam, became a particular focus of suspicion. Soldiers and civilians in these areas were accused of having Vietnamese sympathies and were massacred in large numbers. This internal violence weakened the military and administrative capacity of the regime significantly. At the same time, border conflicts with Vietnam were escalating. The Khmer Rouge had a deep-seated hatred of Vietnam, rooted in historical territorial disputes and ethnic nationalism. Khmer Rouge forces launched repeated cross-border raids into Vietnamese territory, massacring Vietnamese civilians in brutal attacks. These provocations would ultimately seal the fate of the regime. Vietnam, having endured years of Khmer Rouge border attacks and massacres of its citizens, launched a full-scale military invasion of Cambodia on December 25, 1978. The Vietnamese military, battle-hardened from decades of warfare, moved with extraordinary speed. Within just 2 weeks, on January 7, 1979, Vietnamese forces captured Phnom Penh and toppled the Khmer Rouge government. The speed of the collapse shocked the world. The Khmer Rouge, despite its brutal internal discipline, was no match for the organized and experienced Vietnamese military. Pol Pot and the remaining leadership fled into the jungle regions along the Thai-Cambodian border, where they would continue to operate as a guerrilla force for years to come, even receiving tacit support from China and Western nations who opposed Vietnamese influence in the region. Vietnam installed a new government in Phnom Penh, led by Heng Samrin, a former Khmer Rouge commander who had defected. Cambodia began the long and painful process of rebuilding, though the scars left by the regime were immeasurable. The Khmer Rouge continued to hold a seat at the United Nations as the recognized government of Cambodia until 1982, a deeply controversial decision that reflected Cold War geopolitics rather than any moral consideration. The movement gradually weakened through the 1980s and 1990s as defections increased and international pressure mounted. Pol Pot himself died in 1998 under house arrest within the jungle, never having faced formal international justice. The extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, a tribunal established to prosecute surviving Khmer Rouge leaders, only began delivering verdicts decades later. The legacy of the Khmer Rouge remains a wound in the Cambodian national consciousness, a reminder of how ideology, unchecked power, and international indifference can combine to produce unimaginable human suffering. Cambodia continues to reckon with this history, ensuring that the voices of those who perished are never forgotten.